Alpha King was rescued from a lunar collapse by Omega, then asked why the collapse spoke her name. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Max Williams was no ordinary man. He was the Alpha King, the ruler of a vast kingdom that stretched across planets, commanding respect from his allies and fear from his enemies. Known for his strength, leadership, and unmatched power, Maximus had everything one could ask for, except for peace of mind. His life was a constant battle, and the responsibilities of ruling weighed heavily on him. Yet, despite all his might, he found himself in a situation beyond his control. The Lunar Collapse, a catastrophic event threatening to tear apart not just his kingdom, but the very fabric of the universe, was rapidly unfolding. As the moon trembled and the heavens above seemed to crack open, Maximus felt a sharp jolt of panic. The collapse was unlike anything he had ever faced. The familiar sky above his kingdom began to shift, the stars flickering as if in distress. This wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a signal something far greater was at play. The world around him was crumbling, and Maximus, for the first time in his life, was helpless. In the midst of this chaos, a figure appeared, standing firm amidst the destruction. It was Evelyn Eve Thompson, the Omega. She was different from anyone Maximus had ever known. Though the Omega were often seen as weak, low-born, and cast aside, Eve was an anomaly. Her abilities were as mysterious as they were powerful. Where others saw destruction, she saw the potential to rebuild. Eve didn't just observe the lunar collapse, she understood it, almost as if she could feel its pulse. The moment she appeared, the tremors of the collapse seemed to pause, the very air around her calming. She moved with purpose, a sense of control that stood in stark contrast to the chaos that engulfed them both. Maximus, shaken and confused, found himself pulled toward her. He didn't know how she had come to be there, or why she was able to withstand the devastation that threatened to swallow them. All he knew was that she was his only chance. As the two of them stood amidst the shattered landscape, Eve turned to him with calm assurance. She didn't speak much, but there was a look in her eyes that spoke volumes. She was the key to understanding what was happening, to saving them all. But as the dust settled and the echoes of the collapse faded, Maximus couldn't shake one question from his mind. Why had the collapse spoken her name? Why, of all people, was she chosen? The air was thick with tension, the remnants of the lunar collapse swirling around Maximus and Eve as they stood in the silence that followed the disaster. The world around them was fractured, shattered landscapes, broken skies, and the unsettling hum of a universe teetering on the edge of destruction. Maximus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, his mind racing to understand what had just transpired. He had been a ruler, a leader, a warrior. Yet, in that instant, he had been nothing more than a helpless bystander to the catastrophe that had threatened his kingdom. Eve, however, was different. She was unshaken, standing tall as if the destruction around her was simply another challenge to overcome. Her calm presence was both comforting and bewildering. How had she managed to remain unaffected by the chaos that had just unfolded? What was it about her that allowed her to survive where others would have perished? Maximus's gaze was fixed on her, a mix of curiosity and awe. He had heard whispers of Omega abilities, rumors that they possessed untapped powers, but he had never truly believed in them. Now, standing before him, Eve seemed to defy everything he knew about the world. As the dust settled, Maximus couldn't help but ask, "How did you do it?" Eve turned her gaze toward him, her eyes filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "I didn't do it," she said softly. "The collapse, it spoke to me. It called my name." Maximus's brow furrowed in confusion. "Called your name? What do you mean?" Eve's expression was unreadable, but there was a certain sadness in her voice as she replied. "The collapse wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a message, one that only I could hear." Maximus struggled to comprehend what she was saying. A message? From a disaster? It didn't make sense. "But why you?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "Why would it speak to you? What does it want from you? Eve's gaze softened, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. I don't know, she whispered. But I intend to find out. The two of them stood there in the stillness, the weight of the unknown hanging between them. Maximus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger. The collapse was not an isolated event. It was a signal, a warning of things to come. And somehow, Eve was at the center of it all. The Alpha King, who had ruled with unquestionable power and control, found himself uncertain for the first time in his life. Eve, the Omega, was the one who held the answers. Answers that could change everything. We need to figure this out, Maximus said, his voice steady now, though the uncertainty lingered. Together. Eve nodded, a slight flicker of determination in her eyes. Together, she agreed. And so, in the midst of the ruins of a crumbling world, the Alpha King and the Omega set off on a journey to uncover the truth behind the lunar collapse and the mysterious force that had called Eve's name. Neither of them knew what awaited them, but they knew one thing for certain. The path ahead would be anything but ordinary. The journey ahead was uncertain, and yet Maximus felt a strange sense of purpose settling into his chest as he and Eve began their trek across the fractured land. The moon's collapse had not only shattered the sky, but also torn apart the very fabric of their world. What was once a place of harmony and order now lay in ruins, a constant reminder of the forces at play that neither of them fully understood. As they moved forward, Maximus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though no eyes followed them from the shadows. The silence around them was thick, almost suffocating, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Eve led the way with quiet determination, her eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity Maximus had never seen before. She wasn't just looking for answers. She was looking for something specific, something that could unlock the mystery of the collapse and its connection to her. Maximus had always prided himself on his strength and his ability to lead, but here, in this desolate landscape, he felt like a child, lost and unsure. His usual confidence was replaced by an unfamiliar vulnerability, and he couldn't help but glance at Eve, wondering what it was that made her so certain. Eve, he called softly, his voice cutting through the oppressive stillness. She turned, her face serene, but there was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes. What are we looking for? He asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. The answers, she replied simply. The collapse was no accident. It's part of something much larger, something that has been set in motion long before we arrived. Maximus nodded, trying to absorb her words. He had known that the lunar event was far from ordinary, but hearing it from Eve, with the certainty in her voice, made the gravity of the situation sink deeper. He had always been the one with the answers, the one who protected his people, who controlled the future. Now, Eve was the one holding the key to everything. As they continued their trek, the landscape around them grew more strange. It wasn't just the broken earth that disturbed Maximus. It was the air itself. It felt different, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. The closer they got to their destination, the stronger this feeling became, until it felt as though the ground beneath their feet hummed with the power of something ancient and powerful. Eve paused, holding up her hand. Maximus stopped beside her, watching as her gaze focused on something in the distance. There, on the horizon, was a structure, an ancient tower that seemed to rise out of the ground, its dark silhouette cutting through the glowing sky. It was unlike anything Maximus had ever seen. The tower seemed to pulse with energy, its surface shimmering with an eerie light. That's where we need to go, Eve said quietly, her voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. Maximus could feel the weight of her words. The tower was not just a building. It was a symbol, a place of power that could hold the answers they sought. But as they started moving toward it, Maximus couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. He looked around, his senses alert, but there was nothing, no movement, no sound, just the stillness of the world around them. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at him. Do you feel it? He asked, his voice low. Eve glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Yes, she replied simply. We are not alone. Maximus didn't need any more explanation. They were being hunted, stalked by an unknown force. And as they approached the tower, he knew they would have to face whatever awaited them, together. The closer Maximus and Eve got to the tower, the more oppressive the air around them became. It wasn't just the weight of the ruined world that pressed down on them, but something deeper, something ancient that pulsed from the heart of the structure ahead. Maximus could feel it in his bones, the hum of energy, the promise of answers just beyond reach. But there was something else, too. A feeling of being watched. A sense of imminent danger. Eve moved with purpose, her every step measured and calm, as though she had known this path for a lifetime. Maximus, however, was less sure. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious, to be ready for anything. They were not alone, and whatever waited for them in that tower was not a simple puzzle to be solved. It was a force, something far more dangerous than any enemy he had ever faced. As they neared the entrance, the air grew even colder. Maximus instinctively reached for his sword, though he knew it would do little against whatever awaited them. Eve, however, did not seem concerned. Her focus remained fixed on the tower, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She reached out, placing a hand on the cold stone of the tower's wall. The moment her skin made contact, a low hum filled the air. It was as if the tower itself had come alive, responding to her touch. Maximus took a step back, his gaze fixed on her. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. Eve turned to him, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something deep in her eyes. "It's calling me," she said softly. "This tower is alive with the energy of the collapse. It's where the answers are." Maximus was not so sure. The tower looked ancient, its surface worn by time, yet it pulsed with a strange energy that was beyond his comprehension. "We don't know what's inside," he warned. "It could be dangerous." Eve met his gaze, her voice steady but resolute. "I can feel it, Maximus. It's the only way forward. If we don't enter now, we may never have another chance." Maximus hesitated, his mind racing. He had never been one to shy away from danger, but this felt different. Still, he trusted Eve. She had been the one to save him, to guide him when everything seemed lost. If she believed this was the way, then he would follow. "Then let's go," he said, his voice firm. Together, they crossed the threshold of the tower. The moment their feet crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The energy inside was unlike anything Maximus had ever experienced. Thick, electric, charged with the weight of centuries. The walls of the tower seemed to pulse, each beat echoing in the depths of his chest. He could feel the power that radiated from within, but there was something else, too. A presence. Not human, not even familiar. It was something else, something ancient, watching them from the shadows. Eve, however, seemed undeterred. She moved deeper into the tower, her hand trailing along the walls as if she knew exactly where to go. Maximus stayed close behind, his senses on high alert, every step filled with unease. The deeper they went, the more the tower seemed to come alive. The walls whispered, the floor vibrated beneath their feet, and the air grew heavier with each passing moment. As they reached the heart of the tower, they came to a large chamber, its walls lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. In the center of the room stood a pedestal upon which rested a glowing orb. It pulsed with an otherworldly light, its glow casting eerie shadows across the room. Eve stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the orb. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what I've been searching for." Maximus watched her closely, his mind racing. What was this orb? How did it relate to the collapse? And why had it called to Eve? As Eve reached out to touch the orb, Maximus felt the air shift once again. The presence in the shadows grew stronger, and Maximus knew that whatever had been watching them was now ready to make its move. As Eve reached out toward the glowing orb, the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop, and the air grew thick with a powerful energy. Maximus felt it, the sensation crawling along his skin, like an invisible force pressing in from all sides. The orb pulsed with an intensity that was almost overwhelming, casting strange reflections on the walls and floor. Eve's fingers were mere inches away when the presence, that haunting feeling of being watched, became undeniable. Maximus could feel it, a cold, distant force that seemed to draw closer, like a storm gathering on the horizon. He stepped forward instinctively, his instincts kicking in. "Eve, be careful," he warned, his voice tight with urgency. She didn't respond immediately, her focus completely fixed on the orb. It was as though nothing else existed in that moment but the orb's glowing light and the pull it had on her. Maximus's heart raced. He didn't know why, but he could sense danger. Before he could move any closer, the shadows in the chamber seemed to stir, flickering at the edges of his vision. A voice, low and resonant, echoed through the chamber, sending a shiver down his spine. "You shouldn't be here," the voice rumbled, as though it came from deep within the stone walls themselves. Maximus froze, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. "Who's there?" he demanded, though he couldn't see anyone. Eve didn't flinch, her expression unchanging as she continued to move closer to the orb. "This is the source," she murmured, almost to herself. "This is where everything begins and ends." Maximus's mind raced. Was she hearing the voice, too? Or was it something meant only for him? He glanced around the chamber, his senses on high alert. The shadows were thick now, swirling with an unnatural energy that seemed to come alive, wrapping around the edges of the room like tendrils reaching for them. The voice spoke again, louder this time, and this time Maximus could feel its presence behind him. "You do not understand the consequences of your actions. Leave now, or face the price of your ignorance." Maximus's breath caught in his throat. Whoever, or whatever, was speaking, it wasn't human. The power behind the voice was ancient, primal. It knew things. It knew them. Eve finally touched the orb. The moment her fingers made contact, the entire chamber seemed to tremble, and the shadows around them erupted into movement. The floor cracked beneath their feet, and Maximus could feel the energy surge, crackling through the air like lightning. The voice boomed once more, this time with undeniable fury. "Foolish child, you have awakened that which should have remained dormant." Maximus reached out, grabbing Eve by the arm. "We need to leave. Now." But she didn't budge. Her eyes were locked on the orb, her expression distant, as though she were in a trance. "It's too late," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing chaos. "I have to do this. I have to know why it called me." Maximus felt a sharp pang of fear, a deep instinct telling him that Eve was about to make a choice that could alter everything. The energy in the room reached a deafening crescendo, and the walls around them began to glow with the same eerie light as the orb. A portal, shimmering with a cold, blue light, appeared in the center of the chamber. Maximus tried to pull Eve back, but her hand was locked onto the orb, as though it was drawing her in. "Eve," he shouted, but she didn't hear him, her voice lost in the rising hum of power. The portal flickered, and from it, a shape began to emerge. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stepped out from the light. Maximus's heart raced as the figure materialized, its features hidden in the darkness. Eve seemed to sense it, too, her body tensing as the figure drew closer. The energy in the room was now unbearable, a pressure that pressed against them, suffocating. Maximus's grip on Eve tightened. "We need to go," he insisted, his voice a growl. But Eve shook her head slowly, her eyes locking onto the figure emerging from the portal. "I'm not leaving," she said softly. "Not yet." Eve's hand remained firmly placed on the orb, her fingers seemingly locked in place by an unseen force. Maximus's heart raced as he stood there, desperate to pull her away, but the intensity of the energy in the room was overwhelming. The figure emerging from the portal had taken shape now, its form cloaked in darkness, its features shrouded in shadow. It was tall, towering over them both, with a presence that seemed to stretch beyond the limits of the chamber. Eve's eyes, however, never left the figure, nor did she release her grip on the orb. Maximus's breath caught in his throat. "Eve, this isn't you," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation. "Whatever this is, it's not worth losing yourself over." Eve's gaze remained locked on the figure as she slowly spoke, her voice distant, almost dreamlike. "It's not about losing myself, Maximus. It's about understanding. This is why the collapse spoke to me. I have to know what it means." The figure in the shadows took a step forward, and the air in the room grew colder. Maximus could feel the temperature drop, the chills seeping into his bones, yet Eve remained unaffected, standing as though the very air around her was charged with purpose. The figure's voice, when it came, was deep, resonating through the walls of the tower like the sound of ancient stones grinding together. "So, you have come, child of the collapse," the figure intoned, its voice both eerie and commanding. You seek answers, but the price of knowledge is never simple. Eve's face remained unreadable, but Maximus could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't afraid, she was resolute. I know the price, she said quietly. I'm ready to pay it. Maximus stepped closer, his hand reaching out toward her, but he stopped short. He didn't want to pull her away from the orb. He wanted to understand, too. He had to understand why Eve was so compelled, why she was willing to face whatever this was, no matter the cost. The figure in the shadows stepped closer, its form now almost tangible, as if the very darkness of the tower had coalesced into this strange, towering entity. It paused before Eve, regarding her silently for a moment before it spoke again. The collapse was not a mistake, it said, its voice now carrying a weight of finality. It was the beginning of something far greater than you can comprehend. And you, child of the collapse, are its chosen vessel. Eve's eyes widened, but she did not recoil. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lingered in the air. The figure's form shimmered for a brief moment, its shape flickering like a flame in the wind. The collapse was not an accident, it repeated, but the opening of a gateway. A doorway to a time before time, a place where the fate of your world will be decided. You were called because you are the one who will determine its future. Maximus felt his heart race at the words, the implications of what the figure was saying sinking in like a stone in his stomach. This wasn't just about the collapse. It was about the future of their world, the fate of everything they knew. Eve's grip tightened on the orb, and she seemed to draw strength from its energy. I don't know if I can control it, she admitted quietly, her voice full of uncertainty for the first time. But I have to try. Maximus felt the weight of her words, and for a moment, he wasn't sure what to say. He had always been the one in control, always the protector, but now he felt like an outsider in this strange, unknowable situation. The figure, sensing the hesitation in the air, tilted its head as if considering something. Then it spoke once more, its voice low and heavy with meaning. The choice is yours, child of the collapse. You may take the knowledge, but know this, your world will never be the same. The consequences will ripple through time, through every life. And you will carry the burden of that choice for eternity. Maximus stepped forward once more, his gaze fixed on Eve. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the weight of the decision she had to make. But even in the face of this overwhelming pressure, she didn't falter. She knew what she had to do. We will face it together, Maximus said softly, his voice filled with unwavering resolve. Eve turned her head slightly to look at him, a small flicker of gratitude passing through her eyes. And then, with a deep breath, she made her decision. She turned fully toward the orb, her hand closing around it. And as she did, a surge of light erupted from the orb, engulfing the chamber in a blinding flash. The figure in the shadows stepped back, its form dissipating into the light. For a moment, everything was still, silent, before the light slowly began to fade. As the blinding light from the orb faded, Maximus blinked, his vision adjusting to the now dimly lit chamber. The air was heavy, thick with the energy that still pulsed from the orb. He could feel it vibrating through his skin, through his very bones, as though it was a living force, responding to Eve's touch. He turned toward her, but she stood there, frozen, her hand still gripping the orb tightly. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking, and for a moment, Maximus feared she might have been overwhelmed by the power. But then, she blinked slowly, and a faint, uncertain smile tugged at her lips. It's done, Eve said softly, her voice distant, as if she had just woken from a deep sleep. Maximus stepped closer, his hand hovering near her shoulder, unsure whether to touch her or not. Eve, he whispered, his voice filled with concern. Are you all right? She turned her head toward him, her gaze clearer now, more focused, but there was something different in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. The light from the orb seemed to have left a mark on her, like a new fire burning deep within her. I'm fine, she said, though her voice held a new weight. But something has changed. Maximus studied her closely, the unease creeping back into his chest. What do you mean? I can feel it, Maximus, she replied, her voice tinged with wonder and fear. The energy from the orb, it's inside me now. I can hear. I can sense things I shouldn't be able to. She took a deep breath, her fingers still trembling around the orb. The collapse wasn't just an event, it was a signal, a calling. And I think, her voice trailed off, as if she was still trying to process everything that had just happened. Maximus didn't know what to say. He had seen Eve change before his eyes, but this was something else entirely. The force of the orb, the power it had unleashed. It was clear that Eve was no longer the same person. She had been chosen for something far greater than either of them had realized. A sudden, sharp noise echoed through the chamber, drawing Maximus's attention. The shadows that had been still only moments before now seemed to shift again, as though the very walls were alive. Eve turned her head toward the source of the noise, her expression hardening. "We're not alone," she said, her voice steady, but there was a note of urgency in her words. Maximus instinctively reached for his sword, though he knew the danger they faced now wasn't something a blade could easily defeat. The shadows around them seemed to move faster, swirling in chaotic patterns that defied logic. From within the darkness, another figure began to emerge, its form indistinct, but growing clearer with every passing second. Maximus felt his heart rate quicken, his senses heightened as he watched the figure draw closer. The figure was tall, cloaked in an unsettling darkness, its features obscured, but its presence was unmistakable. Eve stepped forward, her body tense but unyielding. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just unlocked a deep, untapped power. The figure did not respond immediately. Instead, it seemed to pause, studying Eve with a chilling intensity. Then, it spoke, its voice soft yet ominous, like a whisper carried on the wind. "I am the one who oversees the collapse," it said, the words sending a shiver through Maximus. "And I have been waiting for you." Maximus's grip tightened on his sword, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want with her?" he asked, stepping in front of Eve, his protective instincts kicking in. The figure's gaze shifted briefly to Maximus, but it was Eve it was truly focused on. "You, child of the collapse, are the key," the figure said, its voice tinged with a strange reverence. "You are the one who will either save this world or watch it unravel. The choice is yours." Maximus stood rigid, his mind racing with questions. Who was this figure? What did it mean by the key? And what was Eve truly capable of now? Eve stood motionless, her eyes locked onto the figure, her expression unreadable. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice low but firm. "But I will face whatever comes. I will not let the world fall apart." The figure regarded her for a long moment, as though weighing her resolve. Finally, it spoke again. "Then prepare yourself, child. The collapse is only the beginning." The figure stood motionless, its form still cloaked in darkness, as Eve and Maximus waited for the next move. The air in the chamber had grown thick, vibrating with the tension of the moment. Eve's hand still rested on the orb, and the energy it released hummed through the room, growing louder as time passed. Maximus could feel the weight of the figure's gaze on him, even though its face was still obscured in shadow. The sense of being watched was palpable, and it made his skin crawl. Eve stood tall, unwavering, despite the growing intensity of the situation. She was no longer the woman Maximus had first met. She had become something more, something that drew power from the very fabric of the collapse. Her resolve was unshakable, but Maximus couldn't help but feel the fear rising in his chest. "What do you mean by the collapse is only the beginning?" Maximus asked, his voice steady but filled with underlying concern. The figure seemed to consider his question for a long moment before it spoke again, its voice as cold as ice, but somehow familiar, like a distant echo. "The collapse was merely the opening, the first phase of a cycle that will tear through the fabric of reality itself. You have no idea what's coming, but you will soon find out." Maximus stepped closer to Eve, his protective instincts taking over. "And what role do you play in all of this?" he demanded. The figure's laugh was soft, almost mocking, and it reverberated in the chamber. "I am the keeper of the collapse, the guide through the unraveling. I ensure that those who are called to the path can fulfill their destinies. And she," the figure said, pointing at Eve, "is the key, the one who will either bring the world to its knees or lift it from the ashes." Eve's eyes, which had been filled with uncertainty only moments before, now glimmered with a newfound intensity. "And what does it mean, the key?" she asked, her voice low but determined. "The key," the figure intoned, "is the catalyst. The one who will unlock the gates between the worlds, allowing the collapse to spread beyond this realm into the others. She has the power to stop it, but only if she makes the choice. A choice that will cost her everything." Maximus's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of the figure's words sank in. The fate of everything, of the entire world, rested on Eve's shoulders. He had always seen himself as a protector, but now, in the face of this overwhelming force, he was powerless. Eve was the only one who could make a difference. But at what cost? "And if she refuses?" Maximus asked, his voice sharp with a rising sense of dread. The figure tilted its head slightly, as though considering the question. "Then the collapse will continue, unstoppable, until all things are lost. No one, not even you, can change that fate." The air around them seemed to grow colder still, as if the chamber itself was reacting to the figure's words. Eve's grip on the orb tightened, and for the briefest moment, Maximus thought he saw a flicker of doubt cross her face. But then she straightened, her eyes locking with the figure. "I will not let this world fall," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, unwavering determination. "I may not understand everything, but I will do whatever it takes to stop it." The figure seemed to study her for a moment, before nodding slowly. "So be it," it said, its voice carrying a strange finality. "Then you must face the trials. Only through them will you be able to unlock the power within you, to make the choice that will shape the fate of all worlds." With that, the figure's form began to dissolve, its shadowy presence slowly fading into the ether. The room was left in eerie silence, the energy from the orb still pulsing in the air, but the figure was gone. Maximus turned to Eve, his eyes filled with both admiration and concern. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly. Eve took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. "I don't know what lies ahead," she said, her voice steady. "But I know I can't back down now. The world depends on it." Maximus nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Then we face it together, whatever comes next." Eve's decision was made, and the weight of it seemed to settle over her like a mantle, heavy but resolute. She stood before the empty space where the figure had dissolved, the remnants of its dark energy still lingering in the air like a cold mist. Maximus stood beside her, the resolve in his chest mirroring her own. They were no longer just two individuals caught in the wake of a catastrophe. They had become something more. The trials awaited them, and no matter the cost, they had to face them together. Eve's eyes were fixed on the space ahead, as if she could see the path that lay beyond the visible. The orb in her hands still hummed, its energy pulsating, yet it felt like the calm before a storm. "The trials," she muttered, more to herself than to Maximus. "What exactly are they?" Maximus's voice was steady when he replied, though he, too, was uncertain. "We'll find out soon enough." The air around them began to change again, subtly at first, but then more profoundly. It was as if the very fabric of reality was shifting, responding to the presence of the orb and the choices they had made. The walls of the chamber, once firm and unyielding, seemed to ripple, as though the space itself was alive, breathing, waiting. Maximus felt the pull of it, the oppressive weight of something ancient stirring in the shadows of the tower. "It's starting," Eve whispered, her voice tight with anticipation. Maximus reached out, placing his hand on her shoulder, grounding her, as much for his own sake as for hers. He didn't know what trials awaited them, or how they would survive the coming challenges, but he knew one thing with certainty: they were in this together. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the air thickened once again. Slowly, the shadows of the room began to coalesce into distinct shapes, flickering as though the fabric of space and time were unraveling before their eyes. A low rumble filled the chamber, vibrating through the stone beneath them. Eve tightened her grip on the orb, her knuckles turning white as the energy from the sphere intensified. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath, trying to center herself in the chaos. "Stay close," she said, her voice firm, though it carried a quiet desperation. Maximus nodded, stepping closer to her. "I'm right here." And then, as if triggered by their words, the space around them shifted entirely. The chamber was gone, replaced by an expanse of swirling mists and shadows. Maximus blinked, disoriented by the sudden change. The ground beneath them was no longer solid but seemed to stretch into infinity, a vast expanse of swirling clouds and fractured light. The orb in Eve's hand pulsed brighter now, casting long, eerie shadows across the endless void. Eve stepped forward, her feet not touching the ground, as if gravity had lost its hold on the world. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice filled with awe and fear. Maximus couldn't answer. He was too overwhelmed by the sight, by the sensation of being somewhere beyond time and space. "It's a test," he finally said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "We've crossed into something else. This is where the trials begin." Eve's face was unreadable as she turned toward him. "Are we ready for this?" she asked, a quiet vulnerability creeping into her voice. Maximus looked into her eyes, his hand gently squeezing hers. "We don't have a choice, but I know we can face it together." The void around them seemed to respond to their words, the mist swirling faster, the shadows lengthening. And then, in the distance, a shape began to form, a silhouette emerging from the chaos. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, its presence familiar yet alien, just like the figure they had met in the tower. Maximus's heart raced as the figure approached, a deep, resonant voice filling the space around them. "The first trial begins now," it intoned. "You have chosen to face the collapse. But know this, you cannot succeed without sacrifice." The words sent a chill through Maximus, but Eve stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "We're ready," she said, her voice strong despite the uncertainty. The figure's silhouette flickered, and it vanished, leaving only a lingering echo in the void. The trials had begun, and there was no turning back. Together, they would face whatever came next, no matter the cost.